Hello and welcome everyone. This is the next session of training on the principles of nurture. You will recall that in the August of 2020, everyone employed in schools and settings across Scottish Borders Council took part in the introductory training on this topic. That was the beginning of the project to develop SBC into a nurturing authority. The project then progressed to delivering training on each of the 6 nurture principles. Most of you will have attended the first 2 of those training sessions. They looked at the importance of the school environment as offering a safe base, and at how we can see behaviour as a communication. This academic year, we are looking at 2 more principles. The focus today is on Nurture Principle 6, and this explores the importance of transition in the lives of young people. There will be a second training session which looks at the importance of understanding children and young people's learning and behaviour in terms of where they are developmentally. You will receive that training input later this year. Most of you will be familiar with the principles that underlie a nurturing approach, but we're just going to have a brief reminder of them now. As I say, they are at the heart of how we want to be understanding and supporting our children and young people. We are delivering training on 2 principles each year. By the end of the next academic year, that is the summer of 2024, they will all have been covered. So Nurture Principle 1 is being looked at later on this year, that is, children's learning is understood in developmental terms. Nurture Principle 2 was looked at last year, the classroom offering a safe base. Seeing nurture as being important for the development of children's well-being will be looked at in the future. And the place of language and its importance in communication will also be looked at a future date. All behaviour is communication was looked at last academic year. And Nurture Principle 6, the importance of transition in children's lives, is of course the subject of this presentation today. It is worth repeating that the principles do not stand separate from each other. They are very much interlinked. You will see close parallels during this session with matters that were raised in previous training, for example. You will also see connections with other relational approaches to working with children that you may well have had training on in the past. So, the aims of today's session. In this session, we are looking to deepen our understanding and awareness about transitions. We want to be being mindful about how children and young people can be affected by them. So we're wanting to explore what we mean by transitions and the different kinds of transitions that people experience. We're wanting to build recognition that transitions are a natural part of life for everyone, and to explore ways in which transitions can be particularly challenging for some young people. We want to identify ways in which the adults in school can work to reduce the challenging aspects of transition, build on the positive elements of transitions, and recognise that transitions may be problematic for some young people. Transitions are events that we all go through, of course, and not all of them are easy, and some of them can be painful and can be left unresolved. I'm sure that everyone listening will be able to recall a personal transition that didn't go well, that left us feeling bad or uncomfortable or embarrassed, for example. We hope that no one will feel triggered or find this session brings up painful memories for them, and we encourage you to look after yourselves and to seek support should that be needed. Please don't feel that you are under any pressure to discuss anything that you would rather not talk about. And equally, please be sensitive to others' needs in this context. It's all consistent with a nurturing approach. Transition involves moving from where we are to somewhere else. So it always involves change, and that change involves leaving something behind and having something new. Transitions are, of course, a natural and common part of life. We all go through many, many of them. They can seem massive at the time, or equally, they can pass by almost as if insignificant, almost unnoticed. There are some transitions that almost everyone goes through: starting school, leaving home, getting a new job, changing jobs. These are what we call normative transitions, in that they are a typical, natural part of life, of typical development. We can expect them to happen, and so we know they are coming along. That does not mean that they are always completely predictable. Although we usually know when they are likely to happen, there are times when such normative, typical transitions can happen unexpectedly. These can be the adjustments we have to make to adapt to sudden changes of life or lifestyle. For a child, there could be a sudden change of school because of suddenly moving home for family or other reasons. For an adult, the unexpected and early death of a parent brings a normative transition, but it might be a much more problematic change if we were not expecting it. We may not have had time to imagine the new life, to think through, so we can plan and make adjustments. So this brings me to say a few words about resilience. When we say resilience, and this applies as much to adults as it does to children, we are often referring to how well we can cope with the unexpected, that sense of being stable under stress. Resilience is something that helps us to manage unexpected transitions. So, helping children and young people to have the skills and attributes to be able to manage transitions is something that will be of help to them in many aspects of future life, because it builds resilience. A key thing in all of this is the importance of individual experience. A transition is significant if the person going through it experiences it as significant. That may sound like stating the obvious, but we can't assume that everyone will experience the same things in the same way. One child may find the transition to secondary school exciting, thrilling, and a positive experience. Another may find it very problematic. This could be despite the arrangements being identical for both children. So we need to be careful about making assumptions about what is and what will be significant at the individual level. So far, most of the transitions we have been talking about are normative ones. And when people talk about transitions, this is frequently what they mean: the large changes that are often celebrated when we move from one situation to another. These are vertical transitions because it's often as if we're moving up a level onto something new. There is a general understanding and agreement in society that these transitions are important. We mark vertical transitions by means of a number of rites of passage. You just need to walk around in any university city at the right time of year, and you'll see hundreds of bright young graduates with their proud parents as they go through that graduation ceremony, which is the rite of passage as they transition from being a student to whatever's happening in the next phase of their life. And we mark vertical transitions also through religious observance. And many cultures have ways of marking the transition out of childhood, for example. One can think of bar mitzvahs and first communions as being example of these vertical transitions being marked. But why do we mark them? Well, we mark them to recognize how important they are, that they involve wholesale changes in aspects of life. And this is true for most vertical transitions. Transition to secondary school involves changes at so many levels. There's the social level where we're making new friends and acquaintances, and that can sometimes bring new challenges as well, and fears, worries about, will I have new friends? Will people like me in my new class, for example? So that's one set of challenges. Another set of challenges around moving to secondary school is the change, or the perceived change, around the intellectual demand, the demands of a new curriculum, for example. And then there is our emotional response to these experiences and our perception of ourselves. We see ourselves differently now, and that can often bring changes in role. We see ourselves as a secondary school pupil with a new uniform, mixing with older children, and that changes our perception of ourselves. But it also means we can be seen differently by others and may well have different family responsibilities placed on us. So vertical transitions are big shifts and are marked because they are important. But not all transitions are vertical, and not all significant transitions appear big. And we'll say a bit more about this shortly. But I want to say something about families and transition. It's a big deal. Those of you, for example, who work with children and young people with complex needs will know what a massive thing it can be for some parents for their child with significant disabilities to start school. It can be a time of heightened anxiety for the parents and the carers. Will my child be okay? Will they look after him or her properly? How can they keep the child safe when I'm the only person who has ever really understood their needs? I've singled out starting school here, but of course the same issues arise with other prominent normative vertical transitions, going to secondary school, leaving school, moving on to adult ed and adult services. And I'm saying these things primarily to make sure that we don't forget that parents and carers can find aspects of transition difficult too. And so it's important that they are part of the picture when we're thinking about how to support the child. And the example I gave around children and young people with very significant complex needs, of course, can apply equally to somebody who's developing more typically. But before we go on to explore any of these matters further, now is a chance for you to have a discussion and reflect on some of what we have looked at. So I'm asking you to think of a significant transition that went really well for you, not a problematic one that went really well. Would you say it was a vertical one? Was it a predictable one? Was it normative? What made it a good experience for you? That's the key point. So share the key points of that with a colleague, compare their experiences with your own. You can have a group discussion or in a dyad. I suggest you perhaps take a photo of this slide or use a snipping tool so you've got it available for you if you can't see the screen at that point. And I suggest you take up to 10 minutes for this conversation. And I'll see you, or you will hear me just after that. And welcome back. An important message I want to underline, and I hope that the discussion you have just had will fit in with this, is that transitions in themselves don't have to be problematic. There are many transitions that we encounter that are really rewarding, that open up new worlds of experience. As a personal comment, I recall my admiration when my elder daughter told me, as she started university, that she looked on the other students, quote, all as new friends to make. That was a lovely example of reframing, a concept you will remember from a previous training. So reframing a potentially nerve-wracking experience as a positive opportunity. So some young people will find some transitions exciting and full of possibilities. Joining the rugby club, getting a first boyfriend. I could go on. So far, we have been talking about transitions as large-scale events, big shifts in experience. I now want us to start thinking about those smaller transitions that take place on a daily basis for so many, if not all, of our children and young people. These are not the large-scale vertical transitions that were noted and celebrated. We call these other kinds of transitions horizontal ones because the young person is moving between situations. And also they could frequently be described as micro-transitions because they seem, in many ways superficially at least, quite small and possibly insignificant. Some of these horizontal transitions are larger and appear more significant than others, on the surface at least. Going to school each morning, for example, is one such. Going home at the end of the day. At a lower level, shifting between classes to follow a timetable. Coming in after break, returning to work. Leaving your table or your workstation to work with another group are all examples of horizontal transitions, possibly micro transitions. In fact, we can see so many of the daily events in school and at home as involving transitions of some kind and at some level of complexity or difficulty, or possibly lack of difficulty. I want to have a little pause right now and have a stand back and reflection on what we've been talking about. I think a key question is this all really so important? Isn't this all just common sense? And the point I'd like to make is the subject takes us right back to the importance of relationships in achieving successful outcomes for our children. We know that good quality relationships in schools and settings are a key protective factor for young people. And we are also aware of how important it is for the school or the setting to be a place where children and young people can feel safe. You will recall the training session last year that looked at the importance of there being a safe base for children. Thinking about transitions supports this and also extends this. Where transitions are carefully managed, we can see enhanced predictability. Children aren't taken by surprise because they know what is coming. That, in turn, helps them to manage their own learning and to regulate their own behaviour. Let's move on from thinking about transitions at the universal level, because for our more vulnerable children, transitions bring a different set of challenges frequently. And to look at this, I want to go over a couple of key ideas that come from attachment theory. So first, let's look at what happens in typical healthy development. Here we have an illustration of what we like to call a healthy attachment cycle. It's a cycle because these are experienced repeatedly many times over development of the child. Right from birth, but not just in the neonatal stage, children experience this. So, starting at the top, with babies, when they have a need, what do? They cry. And we all know how a baby's cry is perfectly designed to grab our attention as parents. So we respond. And so the baby's needs are met. We feed them, we comfort them, we warm them up if they're cold, we cool them down if they're hot, we amuse them if they're bored. It almost becomes a dance. The baby expresses a need and the parent responds to it over and over again. It's through that repeating dance that trust develops and basic developmental foundations are laid. Essential learning takes place. And so, what does the baby learn? Well, the baby learns lots of things from this. They learn that they can have their needs met. They learn that they are safe. They learn that adults will look after them. And they learn, really importantly, they learn that the world is a predictable place. And that's the key point in our thinking today. And they also learn that others will respond to them and their needs. And that is so important in developing in an emotionally healthy kind of way. So through this repeating loop, this dance of having needs and having the needs met, the baby forms an attachment. And by doing that, they learn what it means to make a relationship, what it means to be connected to another person. And the way we think about this understanding is in terms of the child having an internal working model of what it means. Psychologists like models, and this is an example. We all have an internal working model of what relationships are and about how in my case, how I relate to other people. So the model is a set of unconscious ideas and beliefs. We're not always aware of what they are. We certainly can't see this model, but it's a set of unconscious ideas and beliefs about how I relate to other people and how I can expect other people to relate to me. So that helps in maintaining trust. That helps in managing my own emotions. It contributes to my sense of self and what kind of person I am and my beliefs about myself. And because I've developed trust and confidence, I'm able to explore the environment in a safe kind of way, knowing when I was a child that there would be an adult who would take care of me if things went wrong. And that raises the question about what happens when this developmental process doesn't work so well. So that leads us to have a look at this example of an unhealthy attachment cycle. Here we can see the baby still has needs, of course, and still cries, because that's what babies do. But if the adult doesn't respond by meeting the needs, and there may be many different reasons for this, then the conditions for building trust in what adults will do start to get shaky. If this happens just a few times, then there shouldn't be any kind of problem. It's when it happens on multiple occasions over an extended period of time that the child starts to build an internal working model that is less positive. That set of unspoken beliefs and ideas about themselves and about others risks beginning to look more like this. So here we have some thoughts about the impact of negative early experience on children's beliefs about themselves and about others in terms of the internal working model of relationships that they've been developing. So with repeated negative cycles of experience, they may well develop ideas about themselves that they are just bad people, or they are not worthy of love, that they are unsafe and the world is an unsafe place and harmful things could happen to them, that they don't deserve positive experiences, and they don't have the strength, the ability, the agency, the power to make things better for themselves or different for themselves. So they're left with this sense of possible worthlessness. But there are beliefs also about others and what they are like. And this notion that others are unreliable and unpredictable, because that was very much their early experience when they cried and needed support, needed care, needed nurture. The adult didn't come or came very unpredictably. And so that sense of others are unreliable and unpredictable, or others don't respond to their needs. The child's needs just won't be met, that others don't care, and that, yes, others are unsafe to be around and certainly don't understand the child as a person. So you may be asking, what has all this got to do with transitions? Well, the astute amongst you may well have worked this out already and worked out where we are going with this. Children and young people who have not had a good experience of that healthy attachment cycle, those children learn from an early age that the world is unpredictable, that they can't have their needs met, that adults are unreliable. So for children with these kinds of needs, they find the unpredictability that can come with transitions to be problematic. They can be triggered by the uncertainty. It's almost as if they are taken straight back to that unhealthy, unsafe place of their earlier development. Now, this by no means is the case for everyone. The challenge is that we frequently don't know. And this is where we need to do the kind of behavior detective work we described in the training on behaviorist communication. We need to develop our hypotheses carefully. So let me give you an example about Archie, who's in P1. That's not his real name. He's a real person, but I've changed key details so as not to make him recognizable to anyone. This is a story about Archie, who was in P1, not his real name. He lived at home with his mum and his dad and his elder brother, who wasn't presenting any concerns. In some ways, Archie was intellectually seen as quite an able little boy at school. He had good verbal skills and had interests in a range of things. He liked science and he liked the natural world. He quite liked history. He liked to have friends to play with. Despite this, he was finding aspects of school life really problematic. He could get very upset and even outraged if things did not go his own way. And this could be quite unpredictable for the adults to deal with. They couldn't see what might be triggering him, other than things not going his own way. We couldn't always tell why it was a problem today when it hadn't been a problem the day before, for example. And if things felt unfair to him, that could lead him to becoming even more distressed and even more angry. An additional thing we began to notice was that things were particularly difficult for him toward the end of the school day. We were more likely to encounter occasions when he was distressed or upset or angry at the latter part of the school day. We initially put this down to his being tired, but we also noticed that he was very reluctant to get on the bus to go home. Sometimes he would run away and hide in different parts of the school or in the playground. So this triggered further thoughts for the adults. Was there something going on at home that he was afraid of? Was there something happening on the bus that he was trying to avoid? So discussion with the parents was quite interesting because they reported a parallel thing happening in the mornings at home, that he appeared to want to avoid to come to school, although he also said he liked school. So we began to think of this in terms of the transitions involved. Could it be that the current arrangements involved just too many transitions for him that he was finding difficult? He would part from his parents to get on the bus and then have to cope with all of what goes on the school bus before the transition where he leaves that bus and adjusts to coming into school, into the playground, meeting the adults, and then into class. So we thought about maybe we can just reduce some of these transitions. And his parents were able, with some difficulty, to make arrangements so that they brought him to school and collected him at the end of the day. And this succeeded in lowering the temperature for him. So he was no longer going on the bus. He was no longer leaving the adults and going to get on the bus and get off the bus at the other end. We also agreed with his parents that they would give him an object from home that could be a support for him through those transitions. He chose a soft glove of his mother's that had really positive sensory qualities. It was nice to stroke. It was kind of silky and smooth, and it smelt of home. And he associated it with her, and that seemed to support the process for him as well. It didn't solve all the problems that he was encountering or presenting, but it helped us all to think about how transitions were affecting him, and it was clear that in the classroom, horizontal transitions were frequently problematic. We had no reason to think that he had encountered harmful experiences when he was younger, like in terms of an unhealthy attachment cycle. We had no reason to think that had been going on. We could have been led into thinking about child protection issues, however, but careful management of the transition process seemed to help us get past that. So that's quite an interesting example, I think, of managing the transitions being a way forward to helping a young person feel a bit safer or feel a bit more settled. Before we go on to look at how we manage the kind of issues that were raised in the case study of Archie, or some of the topics that we've covered so far in this session, let's just take a few moments to think about where we've got to. We've recognized that transitions are an ever-present feature of life for adults and children, and that they can take different forms. They can be large or small, and they can have a significant effect on how we feel or how we experience things, or they could be something that we take in our stride without it causing any particular ramification for us. Transitions can be vertical ones, where we move on and up to a new phase or a new activity or a new version of ourselves, such as changing jobs or leaving school or getting married or starting school, I suppose. Or they could be horizontal ones, which tend to be the smaller transitions, the micro transitions that happen very frequently, multiple transitions of that nature on a daily basis. So getting up out of the house, coming to school in the morning, meeting up with your friends, going into lessons, engaging with a teacher, engaging with a change of class, going to lunch, etc., etc. All those small, micro, horizontal transitions, which for many children, they've taken their stride completely. Other children find them more problematic at different times. So we've been acknowledging that different people can be affected in different ways by different transitions. Before we look in more detail about options available, we have another space for discussion and reflection. This time, I invite you to think about practice in your school or setting currently. Bearing in mind what we have just explored, please discuss with a colleague anything that you find that is working well in your setting or school for supporting transitions. And what, if anything, do you think is missing? Please take at least 10 minutes for this and maybe make some notes to feed back to colleagues outside this training session. And now we come to start thinking about what we might do about some of these questions around transition and supporting children with them. Before looking at more precise examples, let's just spend a bit of time thinking about the bigger picture. We know that children manage transition best when adults do certain things. And the points here, I guess, relate very much to relational, humanistic approaches to teaching and to working with children. So you will see parallels with other training and other approaches to supporting children that you will have experienced before. So, for example, when the adults are able to respond predictably and consistently to the needs of the child, that's what helps develop a trusting relationship between the adult and the child. And when that's in place, the children find transition easier to cope with. When the adults engage children in warm and supportive interaction, so there's that sense of a human connection, rather than just you are the pupil and I'm the teacher, that is something that supports the process. If adults can model positive social behavior, that is demonstrating how difficult situations can be handled or problems can be solved, that's a useful, instructive experience for all children. And the establishment of predictable routines and clear expectations and clear boundaries, those are really important. And again, that fits with this notion of a nurturing approach being one that is about clarity and safety and consistency for our children. Having realistic expectations based on their development and their temperament, that fits particularly with Nurture Principle 1, I think it is, where we look at how we make sure that we understand children's behaviour and learning in terms of their developmental needs and where they are in their developmental journey. So those realistic expectations, again, make transitions more manageable for children. Children need to learn how to manage and express their emotions. Some children do that very readily, and other children find that much more tricky. And where we are helping them to regulate their emotions and their expression of emotions in response to challenges, that is a way of teaching children to manage transitions. And so active strategies for handling stress, for problem solving, are important things to help equip children with important skills for dealing with transitions, which is all about learning to deal with things that life will bring. There are adjustments and interventions in 3 broad areas that can be put in place to help children manage transitions. So if we think in terms of managing or making beginnings and endings positive, we think about ways of reducing uncertainty by adding structure, and if we think about how we can use routines and objects to support, we'll now look at each of these in turn. As we come to think about practical ways of helping children manage transitions, we can start thinking about how we make beginnings and endings positive. It's worth remembering, of course, that every transition involves both a beginning and an ending. And so it's just as important to think about how you make the ending a good one as well as the beginning a good one. So one classic area for transitional challenges are around moving to a new class or a new school or having a new teacher, for example. So clear advance warning and advance information, often in a visual form, can be really helpful. Meeting people in advance, whether that's face to face or whether that's online, through a video call or through some other kind of messaging, that can help. Questions about what the school will look like physically as an environment can be addressed by sharing photographs or developing a video tour, for example. So those kind of things can help with preparing for a transition of that nature. Supporting the transition once it's in place. Are we able to use older pupils as mentors, for example? That's something that's very rewarding for those pupils as well, but that could be helpful. Maintaining links after the transition. This is about making the ending good. That can be encouraged in a variety of ways: visiting the old school or the old class, emailing the previous teacher, having contact with the other teacher about what's been happening or what's happening in that class. Making the connection a real and a personal one is helpful. We've already mentioned communication in advance with the new teacher. There's a variety of ways of doing that. And core to all of this is the quality of the relationships. Where there are positive connections between the adults and the child, then the success is far more likely to occur. One could be considering how one might use a soft start or a soft ending for a child, and how can one build in meet or greet systems for the more vulnerable. Again, all ways of making beginnings and endings more positive. Could one plan in advance for an event that's coming up, an activity, perhaps by doing role play or writing about the activity or what's happening? Those kind of things can be helpful also. We commented earlier that transition is a time of considerable uncertainty, and that this can be problematic for anyone, but particularly for our most vulnerable children. So, finding ways to reduce that uncertainty by building in increased structure can help. So here are some thoughts. The setting out of clear sequences and routines, sometimes with visual elements to support them, and then making sure that we actually follow those routines and sequences, adds that structure and a sense of certainty for the child as they experience it on a day-to-day basis. And obviously routines have to change at times, unexpected events occur. So how do we flag those in advance? What kind of support can we give where there has been a sudden and unexpected change of routine? How do we respond to the children who need that greater clarity in advance? We need to be thinking about that. The discussion of routines and negotiation of them with pupils can help, again, building in that sense of certainty. And it also allows a discussion about what do we do if something can't be known in advance. And just the airing of that and the discussion of it can be supportive and reassuring for the child, because they know the adults are thinking about the questions involved. Making sure that the language we use is clear and explicit while we're navigating through changes, if we're having to make adjustments to plans or routines, making sure that there is no risk of confusion or uncertainty in the children's minds because they've got clear information. School trips are a nice example where there's lots of opportunities for planning in advance, using photographs, thinking together about how we will do this activity so that the children feel they know what they're going to be doing, what they're going to be encountering before they go there, and that reduces the anxiety levels, particularly if there are sort of overnight stays involved. Here are some thoughts that could be used at a more targeted level for individuals where there are concerns, or for the group or class as a whole. Some children find having a personalised schedule that is their own for the day, or one that sets out for them alone what is going to happen, to be really helpful. This would be distinct from a visual timetable that is open for all to see, because the personal nature of it means that it is something the child can almost literally hold on to, and that's reassuring. Visual timetables and similar prompts can be supported for the group or the class as a whole. And some people find using music can be helpful when it's used specifically to signal a change of activity, for example, such as an end of lesson piece or a tidying up time song. We've already mentioned how tangible objects that connect the child with their carer or perhaps their teacher can be supportive over transition times. You remember when we talked about Archie and he had the glove that helped him maintaining the link with an important person through transition. So objects can be supportive, as can routines. And then thinking about how we come back into class after a busy activity, having a ready for work routine that perhaps takes place outside the classroom rather than within it. These are things that are worth considering. There's a key message from all of this, which is about being mindful about the way in which transition may affect children and young people in unexpected ways. Transition times can be challenging for children in ways that we don't expect, and that's worth thinking about. And related to that, that means it's not about having off-the-shelf solutions. It's about knowing when something targeted is needed and when that needs to be tailored to the young person or to the group or to the class. Now here's an opportunity for you to have a discussion with a colleague, thinking about an individual child or maybe a class of children where support around transition is required. Think about the three domains that we've just been talking about, that is, managing beginnings and endings positively, thinking about ways of adding structure, and thinking about routines and objects as the three areas. What could you and or others do in terms of those three approaches to increase the supports or structures around the child where transition is required? So if you would perhaps take 10 minutes for that and then come back. Thank you. And now, as we're coming towards the end of this session, I'd like to set out the aims that we'd looked at the beginning, and perhaps as part of your own reflective engagement with the learning outside of this session, I would ask that you consider what you have learned and what you feel needs to happen next, either to support that learning in the future or to take your practice forward. So the things we looked at were we explored what we mean by transitions and the different kind of transitions that people experience, and that acknowledged that transitions are a natural part of life for everyone, but they're not always straightforward for everyone. And so we explored ways in which transitions could be particularly challenging for some of our more vulnerable young people. And we've identified ways in which the adults in school can support under those circumstances. And so some final words. And I make no apology for reading them because I think these words are quite important ones. Firstly, supporting children and young people with transitions has double benefits. The first one being that making transitions manageable reduces the risk of there being unsettled behaviour, reduces the risk of fears and anxieties being triggered for the young person. But just as importantly, helping children cope with transitions gives them skills and competences, gives them problem-solving strategies that will stand them in good stead later in life. So by handling current transitions better, future resilience is enhanced. So there's a double benefit here. And that is the end of this presentation. All that remains is for me to thank you for listening and to say thank you and goodbye as I head off to my own very personal transition. All the best to you all.